Second Amendment victory. The Supreme Court sides with gun owners in New York who want to conceal carry, overturning a 100-year-old law. Bravo. And that's where we begin tonight, where a huge win for gun owners across the country is riveting the nation. The Supreme Court has ruled that New York's proper cause requirement to carry concealed handguns is unconstitutionally restrictive. In a 6-3 decision, the High Court ruled that it should be easier to obtain a carry and conceal license. Here to weigh in, CEO of Starnes Media Group and host of the Todd Starnes Show and author of Our Daily Biscuit, Devotions with a Drawl, Todd Starnes. It's a great name. I could use a biscuit right now. And Jason Rantz is also with us. Jason, I want to start with you. You're in Seattle, one of those cities that would be quite affected by a ruling like this. I'm sure it's very difficult to get a handgun in Seattle, but I'm sure people who love the Second Amendment and American rights are rejoicing right now there. You're one of them? Tell me.
I'm certainly one of them. There are a lot of liberal tears right now flooding the streets of Seattle as a result of this ruling. Obviously, it is the right ruling. There should not be any kind of bureaucrat who gets to decide whether or not you feel like you need a gun for self-defense. That's not how constitutional rights are supposed to work. So I'm very grateful with the fact that the justices decided to go on the right side of this. I don't necessarily think that this came as too much of a shock. I think any reasonable person, frankly, regardless of how you feel about the Second Amendment, can look at this law in New York and say this was clearly overburdensome, and we wouldn't put up with this kind of restriction when it comes to speech, for example. Get in front of a bureaucrat, you or I or Todd, and have to say, okay, prove to us why you need to use satire to get your point across. And no, I don't think you could use satire. Go do a straight segment. Like, no, that's not how it's supposed to work.
Yeah, that's right. They wouldn't put undue burden on somebody trying to practice the 19th Amendment, right? Prove to us that you're a woman who deserves to vote. This seems over cumbersome, overbearing, and it seems deeply unconstitutional. Thank God the Supreme Court, 6-3 decision is pretty devastating, right, Todd?
Well, it is, and I'm in Memphis, Tennessee, where everybody actually owns a gun. It's not all that surprising. It was crazy, this ruling. The law said that even if you lived in a very dangerous neighborhood, you worked late at night and you wanted to get a gun just to protect yourself, under New York state law, they said that's not a good enough reason to own a gun. So I think the Supreme Court made the right call here, but here are 4 words that every single American ought to be shouting from the rooftops, especially in New York State. Thank you, President Trump. This was a result of the justices that President Trump nominated to the Supreme Court. And again, when you talk about the Trump presidency, I think historians are going to look back and realize that really the ultimate success of the presidency and the administration was how he revolutionized the federal judiciary.
This is completely correct. And also, I went and covered, you mentioned dangerous neighborhoods. I went to Seattle, and the last time I was in Seattle, Jason, I went to Chaz, dude, and I walked through that neighborhood, and let me tell you, I wished I had a firearm. I felt scared for my life a couple of times. I saw multiple beatings. I saw people openly using drugs. I saw people looking at me with glassy eyes into the middle distance. Looked like they could have been violent. A number of people walked up to my cameraman and asked them what he was doing there. I wish I was armed in Seattle.
Yeah, although in fairness, that is probably the case outside of just Chop Zone, the mostly peaceful insurrection taking over 6 city blocks. But yes, obviously we're experiencing in Seattle, like so many other liberal cities, a crime surge. And it's not necessarily due to the fact that they are going after people who don't have guns, or they realize probably are not armed. We know that guns can obviously be an incentive to maybe stay away from individuals and try to create victims out of them. But we're dealing with light on crime policies, and we've seen that across the country, which sort of doubles down on why it makes sense for a lot of people, should they feel like they want to take on that responsibility, to arm themselves. I loved hearing from Mayor Eric Adams in New York about how we have to prevent New York City from becoming the wild, wild west. Dude, you run New York City. You are not immune from all of the media coverage of the violence there. I think the problem here is you've got a bunch of people who are just anti-gun as a matter of principle, and they realize that they're running their own city so poorly that that is making the argument as to why some people feel like they need to be armed. And so that inner conflict, I guess, from the left is confusing to them.
Todd, my team recently went to Rifle, Colorado, where Lauren Boebert, she's a congresswoman, she has a restaurant called Shooters, where all of the waitresses are armed, and they have to be armed. It's a requirement to work there. So they carry guns on their hips, and it was a delight. It was a really, really fun documentary, and it was really neat to show this. The Second Amendment as a way of life. You're from Memphis, Tennessee. People have the Second Amendment as a way of life. I'm from the Midwest. You would take your kids out hunting. This was what you did. It was something that was part of your life. It wasn't dangerous or scary. But there seems to be, where Jason lives and in Manhattan, like Mayor Eric Adams was saying this morning, seems to be a massive cultural disconnect on firearms and the Second Amendment as a way of life. Am I wrong?
No, I think there's something to that. I mean, you have an administration and you have people in the mainstream media who would not know the difference between an AR-15 and a Super Soaker. So I think there is a disconnect. Guys, there had been some conversation about how important it is to actually have people in newsrooms, especially at the network level, who understand guns, they understand the industry, they understand the products, and they understand what they're talking about. It's a big problem that the media has when covering religion, for example. They're just completely clueless because, again, it's not part of that. It's not part of that culture. So, yeah, I think there is something to that, guys. I mean, the reality is, by and large, this is a very safe thing to own a gun. Overwhelming number of young people who have guns. They go through the training classes that are sponsored by and promoted by the National Rifle Association, and they are good and honorable people. My big concern as we look forward is what's happening in the Capitol and the Senate, where you have 14 Republicans who, quite frankly, betrayed law-abiding gun owners, siding with the Democrats to give Joe Biden a huge political victory. I hope those senators are looking at the decision that came out of the Supreme Court today, because if that becomes law, I suspect we're going to be right back to the Supreme Court.
Yeah, Jason, we got to go. I'll give you the last comment here. Your thoughts on the 14 senators who, for absolutely no discernible reason, decided to betray the Republican base.
Well, it's not even that. I imagine they believe that they are going to be seen as heroes in their own states, but I don't know anyone who lives in Texas, for example, who's a Republican, expected to put John Cornyn in this position for him to then kind of sell them out. There are aspects of this bill that I think make sense, and if they separated it out and just did a bill to harden schools and put money into mental health, I think you could have had a significantly more symbolic victory here for the American people. 100 senators saying, yeah, we're going to put money into school safety. I think that would have sent a really good message, and it would have been apolitical.
Yeah, way too common sense. Explain that to Shelley Moore Caputo's West Virginia, where Donald Trump won by like 80,000 points and won every single county. Explain that to Joni Ernst's Iowa. Unbelievable. Thank you, gentlemen, for being with us.
Thanks. Ben.